I was 26, teaching economics at the community college, living in a studio apartment that was more kitchen than bedroom. My life was spreadsheets and lesson plans, quiet evenings with herbal tea, and the kind of predictable routine that made my mother proud and my soul ache. That Tuesday night, I'd escaped to Mel's Diner, my sanctuary, for grading papers and pretending I wasn't slowly disappearing into beige walls and sensible shoes. I had my usual booth, my usual black coffee growing cold, while I scribbled notes about supply and demand when she walked in. Savannah. She moved like she owned the world, paint-stained fingers trailing along the backs of chairs, her dark hair catching the fluorescent lights in ways that made my chest tighten. She wore a leather jacket that had seen better decades, and jeans ripped in places that couldn't have been accidental. Everything about her screamed trouble. And then she slid into my booth. "You look like my next bad decision," she said, those green eyes holding mine while her fingers God. Those fingers wrapped around my untouched coffee mug like she'd done it 1,000 times before. My breath caught, literally caught in my throat like I'd forgotten how to breathe. "That's 4 words," I managed, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. She leaned in, close enough that I could smell her turpentine and something floral, maybe jasmine. "Fine. Take me home then." My spoon clattered against the saucer. The waitress, Betty, rolled her eyes from behind the counter where she'd been, watching our interaction like it was her personal soap opera. I meant to say no. I'd practiced saying no to exactly this kind of situation, the kind that my ex, Alex, had warned me about. "You're too trusting, Harper," she'd said during our last fight. "You fell for every sad story, every pretty face." But Savannah's lips had this tilt to them, like she already knew she'd win. And me? Well, I'd always been a sucker for a losing game. "I live 10 minutes away," I heard myself say. What started as one night became a week, then a month. We told ourselves it was tutoring. Savannah needed help with her economics class to graduate, and I needed the extra money. It was practical, innocent, except nothing about Savannah was innocent. She'd sprawl across my couch like she'd grown there, her long legs draped over my coffee table while she flipped through my textbook with exaggerated horror. "You teach this? Christ, no wonder you need a drink." I said I'd tutor you, not that. I'd enjoy it, I'd laugh, but we both knew it was a lie. I lived for these sessions, for the way she'd argue with Adam Smith like he was sitting right there, for how she'd absently brush her foot against my calf while she debated supply curves. "Liar," she'd say, mock offended. "You're enjoying this way too much." The textbook would slide to the floor, forgotten, while we talked about everything except economics. She told me about growing up in 3 different foster homes, about learning to paint because it was the only thing that couldn't be taken away. I told her about my parents' divorce, about choosing safety over passion, about the way I convinced myself that small dreams were better than broken ones. Tutoring. That's what we called it. What it actually was. Savannah rewriting my rules. With every lingering touch, every midnight debate about canes versus kissing. By the 2nd month, I was in love. Desperately, completely, terrifyingly in love with a woman who painted murals on condemned buildings and had never owned a bank account. She was everything I'd been taught to avoid: impulsive, unpredictable, the kind of person who made decisions with her heart instead of her head. She was perfect. I discovered it by accident. I'd gone to her studio, a converted garage behind a house. She shared with 2 other artists a return a sweatshirt she'd left at my place. I knocked, called her name, but there was no answer. The door was unlocked, which was so typically Savannah that I let myself in. The space was chaos. Canvases leaned against every wall, some finished, some barely started. Paint tubes squeezed empty lay scattered across makeshift tables. The air was thick with turpentine and ambition. But in the center of it all, on her easel, was a painting that made my heart stop. It was me, but not me as I was me as she saw me. My hair was wild instead of pulled back, my eyes bright with something I'd never seen in mirrors. I looked fierce, soft, alive. When did you? I whispered, not even hearing her come in behind me. The night you fell asleep on my couch, she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. You sighed in your sleep. This little contented sound, I needed to capture it. I could see paint smeared on her neck, a streak of blue that matched the background of the portrait. Without thinking, I reached up, my thumb swiping it away. Then my mouth followed, tasting paint and salt and something uniquely her. This was the problem with artists. They didn't just see you. They rebuilt you, showed you versions of yourself you never knew existed. And me, I wasn't sure I could survive being known like that again. The last person who'd claimed to really see me had been Alex, and she'd used that knowledge like a weapon, cataloging my insecurities and fears for later use. You're too needy, she'd said, too sensitive, too much. But when Savannah looked at me, I saw strength where Alex had seen weakness. I saw someone worth painting, worth staying up until 3 a.m. to capture in oils and dreams. Of course, Alex couldn't stay away. She never could resist the opportunity to remind me of my mistakes, to catalog all the ways I was destined to fail. She was leaning against Savannah's car when we came out of the grocery store, arms crossed, wearing that smirk that used to make my stomach drop. Perfectly put together as always, pressed blazers, sleek hair, the kind of woman who never had paint. Under her fingernails, still rescuing strays, harp, she said, not even looking at Savannah. That's Savannah. Savannah stepped forward, cool as anything. Funny, she said you were the one who needed saving. My fists clenched involuntarily, but Savannah's hand slipped into mine, squeezing hard. Her fingers were warm, steady, real. She won't last 6 months, Alex said, speaking to me, but about Savannah like she wasn't right there. You know how you get? Too intense, too much. She'd get tired of carrying all that emotional baggage. For a moment, I was 24 again, standing in our shared apartment while Alex packed her things, listing all the ways I was insufficient, too clingy, too dramatic. Too ready to love someone who'd never love me back. But then Savannah spoke, her voice cutting through the past like a blade. The only baggage here is you showing up to mess with something that's none of your business. The thing about old flames, they leave scars. But Savannah, she was a wildfire, burning away everything that came before. Spring semester brought Savannah's thesis deadline up. Solo show that would determine whether she graduated or spent another year scrambling for credits. I'd watch her disappear into her studio for days, surviving on coffee and determination, emerging only when I showed up with food and threats. I found her asleep at her easel one morning, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. Her latest painting, a series about abandoned places finding new life, was smeared where her cheek had rested against the wet paint. You'll kill yourself like this, I said, shaking her awake. She blinked up at me, confused, paint in her hair and dark circles under her eyes. I have to finish, she said, struggling to sit up. The show is in 3 weeks, and I still have 4 pieces to complete, and not alone, you don't. The words came out fierce, surprising us both. She started crying then, these quiet tears that streaked the paint on her palette. I held her as dawn broke through the studio windows, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. What if I'm not good enough? She whispered against my shoulder. What if this is all a mistake? Love wasn't the problem. It was the weight of it, the way it demanded everything. Even when you had nothing left to give. The way it made you vulnerable to someone Elsa's dreams, someone else's fears. I'd spent so long protecting myself from exactly this feeling, the terror of caring more than you could afford to lose. But holding Savannah in that paint-stained studio, I realized that some risks were worth taking. "You're good enough," I told her. "You're extraordinary. And if you'll let me, I'll remind you of that every single day." The opening night of Savannah's show was everything I'd expected and nothing I was prepared for. The gallery was packed professors, students, local artists, people who understood something about art that I'd never learned in all my economics. Textbooks. Savannah moved through the crowd like she belonged there, confident in a way I'd never seen her before. She wore a black dress that made her look like something from a movie, her hair pulled back to show the paint-stained silver earrings she always wore. I stayed near the back, watching her talk to admirers, watching them fall in love with her vision the way I'd fallen in love with her. Her paintings were beautiful abandoned buildings transformed into gardens, broken windows becoming stained glass, decay becoming possibility. But it was the centerpiece that stopped me cold. In the center of the gallery, lit by a single spotlight, was a painting of our diner booth. 2 empty coffee cups sat on the Formica table, one with a ring of lipstick, the other clean. The fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh reality, but somehow she'd found beauty in it, in the cracked vinyl, the stained tabletop, the moment when everything changed. A small placard beside it read, "The 5 words." "I called it the 5 words," Savannah said, appearing beside me. Her voice was shaking, and when I looked at her, I saw tears in her eyes. "Still can't count, huh?" I said, laughing through my own tears, because she was right, it had been 5 words. "Take me home then, the beginning of everything." The crowd had gathered around us, sensing something happening. I could feel their eyes, their expectations, but all I could see was Savannah. And then she dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped. Someone's wine glass hit the floor, but Savannah only had eyes for me. "Harper Chun," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "You taught me that love isn't just about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about showing up. It's about 2 a.m. coffee and shared dreams and believing that someone is worth the risk." She pulled out a ring, not diamond, but a simple band with a stone the color of her eyes. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other 8 months, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life learning how to count with you." The gallery held its breath. In that moment, I could see every possible future, the practical voice in my head cataloging all the reasons to say no, all. The ways this could go wrong. Savannah was still unpredictable, still the kind of person who made decisions with her heart. She'd never balance a checkbook or plan for retirement or fit into the safe, small life I'd built. But she'd also taught me that safe wasn't the same as happy, that small dreams were just fear wearing a disguise. "Yes," I said, and the word came out stronger than I'd expected. "Yes, absolutely, always yes." We were married 6 months later, in the same diner where we met. Betty, the waitress who'd rolled her eyes at our first encounter, officiated. Apparently she'd gotten ordained online just for the occasion. We served coffee and pie instead of cake, and Savannah wore paint-stained Converse with her wedding dress. It's been 3 years now. We moved out of my studio apartment and into a real house, one with a spare room that became Savannah's studio and a kitchen big enough for both of us to cook in. She still can't balance a checkbook, and I still overthink everything, but we've learned to make it work. Some mornings I wake up and can't quite believe this is my life, that I am married to a woman who paints murals on the sides of buildings and argues with dead economists and makes me laugh until my sides hurt, that I chose love over safety and somehow ended up with both. Because here's what I learned. Love isn't about finding someone who fits into your life perfectly. It's about finding someone worth rebuilding your life around. Someone who sees you not as you are, but as you could be, and loves both versions. Savannah still works late in her studio, and I still bring her coffee and remind her to eat. But now she comes to bed eventually, paint-stained fingers tangling with mine, whispering about her latest project or the way the light hit our kitchen window that morning. Last week, she finished a new series paintings of ordinary moments, made extraordinary, me grading papers at the kitchen table, U.S. grocery shopping, arguing about whether we need more coffee, the two of us in our booth at Mel's, older now, still talking over cold coffee and shared dreams. She's planning another show, this one about the ways people change each other, about the courage it takes to let someone remake you. I'm thinking about going back to school, maybe getting my PhD, maybe teaching at a real university. We're talking about kids, about the future, about all the ways our life could expand beyond what we've imagined. But for now, I'm content with this, with 2 a.m. pancakes and paint-stained sheets, and the woman who taught me that the best decisions are the ones that terrify you, the ones that remake you completely. Turns out some risks are worth taking, especially when the reward is a lifetime of 5 words that changed everything. Take me home then. And a love that's worth counting on.